Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Talent Development Hot Seat. I am your host, Andy Storch, and I am so excited that you are joining me today for an interview with my friend, Karishma Buford. And Karishma is the Vice President of Global Talent Management at Groupon, where she leads a global team of talent acquisition, employment branding, and talent development leaders to deliver best-in-class programs that attract, select, develop, and retain great talent, drive enterprise-wide cultural transformation and employee engagement initiatives. Karishma brings 15 plus years of experience designing and developing customized talent development solutions, including well-rounded exposure to e-commerce, financial services, technology, defense, healthcare, and retail industries. I'm getting excited about this. And Karishma received her bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Virginia and doctorate in clinical psychology from the Georgia School of Professional Psychology. She completed her fellowship at the University of Penn Health System and many MBA certification from St. Thomas University, Opus College of Business in Minnesota. That is a lot of education, and I can't wait to dive in and see where that has gotten you. Karishma, welcome to the Talent Development Hot Seat.
Thanks so much, Andy. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Welcome. The honor is all mine. I'm so glad to have you on because I know that you have not only a lot of great experience and a ton of great education, but also having connected with you before, know you are a progressive thinker in this space, like to do things differently, and also really like to customize learning and development solutions you put into place, find a way to measure results and connect them to company strategy. These are all things that I personally am really passionate about and like to help other talent development professionals with. So I'm really excited to dive into that. And I'm also excited that we are recording this virtually, but I'm going to get a chance to see you speak live and meet you in person next week when we're both at the CLO Exchange in Chicago. And of course, by the time this episode airs, it will be after the fact. So we'll be looking back at that, but we do have that coming up.
Yeah, wonderful. I'm super excited doing a fireside chat with my CFO, who's a great champion of all things talent and people. So we're both really excited about that.
Awesome. Well, that's a great, symbol of what I really want to talk about because I know you're big on connecting things to company strategy, really measuring results. And I think a lot of talent development professionals struggle here. And oftentimes their programs are seen by the CFO or the C-suite as cost centers, projects that will get cut if we need to save money versus strategic parts of the organization. So really excited to dive into that. Before we do, would love for you to just share a little bit more of your background and tell us how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So as you mentioned, quite a few years of education and twists and turns have landed me where I am today. So I actually went down the clinical psychology path and graduated from my internship and postdoc. And as I was doing my postdoc in clinical psychology in a therapy setting, I started working with physicians and academic faculty at Penn, and quickly learned that I wasn't actually doing therapy in those settings. I was doing executive coaching with the speed at which the impact and the resourcefulness of those really leaders that they were demonstrating. And so I thought, okay, how can I do this again and again, where I can apply my clinical skills in a faster pace, even business setting. And so as I networked with quite a few folks in the IO space, I realized that getting that consulting background and starting with getting that practice and education in the assessment, leadership development, talent management space would be key. And so I actually joined PDI Ninth House in Boston, where the opportunity was, and moved from Philly to Boston. I spent about 4 years with PDI. Right before the Korn Ferry acquisition. And so I was in Boston, Minneapolis, DC, got a great breadth of industry and company and client exposure, and really learned the IO space, as I mentioned, that I didn't get in grad school, which set me up for an internal position. And so I was in DC with PDI, and an opportunity came up with a defense company, BAE Systems, where the global headquarters is in the UK and the US subsidiary is based in Arlington, Virginia. So they were pulling together shared services, HR, and in a COE, at the time, the talent COE needed a talent manager where they would work with their business unit in terms of identifying what the key talent needs were and shaping solutions and delivering against those. So I spent 4 years at BAE Systems. I entered as a talent manager. I left as a director of talent management for the 30,000 employees, that U.S. subsidiary, and a solid team with some great wins across 2 CEOs. And then I was back at that speed thing again and wanting to go to a company that just moved more quickly and risk-taking and innovative. And I did a 180 when I joined Groupon, moved my family from the DC area to Chicago, and came in as a global head of talent development. 30 days in, I was asked to take on inclusion and diversity. Never having done that before, I am somebody who loves new challenges. So of course I said yes, and spent 2 years owning both talent development and inclusion and diversity, and learned so much on the diversity side and the complexity of diversity and how you actually advance a culture around inclusion. So that was a great experience. And then 7 months ago, our head of talent acquisition departed Groupon, and I took over global recruiting. So my team went from 10 to 80 overnight. And now I own all of talent management, which is attract, select, develop, engage, and all the processes and programs and initiatives are within those 4 buckets. So that brings us to today.
Wow, you have done a lot and lived in a lot of places too.
Yes, I have.
As someone who loves to travel and visit different places, and having lived in a few different places, I just have to ask you offhand, what's been your favorite city to live in?
Oh, of course you're going to ask me that. So we love Chicago. We love Chicago as a city. We love the summers more than the winters.
Yep.
So it's been a great city. I would say it's pretty even between Chicago and Philadelphia. My 2 years in Philadelphia were really amazing. My best friend still lives there, and the friendships that I built and the learning that happened over those 2 years was just really, really huge. And so Chicago and Philly probably neck and neck.
Nice. I should mention that we're recording this in August. If this was January or February, you'd probably say, I don't like Chicago. I'd rather be
maybe Philly would make it just
I'd rather be in a different city. Yeah, it really depends on the time of year, right? But right now you're loving Chicago.
But you know what's cool about Chicago, even compared to DC, is like the soul, the culture, the music, the food. There's just a lot of great diversity.
Yeah.
And so that's something very important, and certainly a value that we want to instill in our children. And so having that diversity in the city we live in is really important.
Yeah, definitely. I love Chicago. I love visiting. I'm excited to be going up there in just a few days for that conference.
Yeah.
And I'm a Florida boy, so I don't know if I could ever live there, but I definitely love visiting and try to get up at least once or twice a year.
Yeah.
My best friend from college lives in Chicago as well, and I always go visit him. So, but I want to get back to your career because you've done a lot there. And going back to you getting that consulting experience,
Yeah.
Guy Ninth House.
Yeah.
I find that's unique, and having gotten that and then going in-house, how has that experience helped you in your career in talent development and HR?
Yeah. So I think for me, given my background on the clinical side, the consulting experience gave me, from a technical standpoint, a foundation, because I really didn't have that. I mean, when you think about the clinical program, I'm truly doing clinical assessments and clinical therapy versus leadership assessments and leadership development and executive coaching. So it really gave me a great foundation by doing 500 assessments across that 4-year time, where I'm going through cognitive and personality assessments and experience assessments and business simulations and behavioral interviews, learning to pull it all together and provide a recommendation to a company on what the strengths and opportunities of those leaders are, whether they should be hired, or what you're getting if you make this hire, was really just super, super foundational in terms of the technical learning. I would say I also learned how to diagnose in terms of root cause and problems, and really strengthen your critical thinking skills as a consultant, because you're coming in from the outside and you want to seek to understand. That's what the best consultants do, is really dig in to understand versus being too quick to offer solutions. Maybe you've heard something about that.
Something like that. That's why I started this podcast, because I like to ask questions. I might as well get
Exactly. There you go. There you go. That quench, that thirst, for curiosity and wanting to learn, and that's like just a foundational skill for consulting. So I definitely learned that. And then when I made the transition internally, one of my, I think, biggest mistakes was being too much of a consultant and not practical enough and not business focused enough. And it was a real stark transition going from external to internal. And so, I can happy to talk about that more in depth, but it was a humbling learning experience to make that transition.
Okay, yeah, I definitely want to get to that. But before we
Yeah.
really dive in, there's a
Yeah.
couple of things I want to get to first, and that is some of the programs you've put into place, particularly at Groupon, and how you
Yeah.
customize those and measure the success of those. So we'll start more with achievements. But when you think
Yeah.
about the programs you've been building over time, especially since you've gotten to Groupon, I know you're big on customizing solutions and really measuring
Yeah.
the success of those. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, how do you approach putting together a new program, and how do you customize it? Do you do everything in-house? Do you use partners? What's your
Yeah.
approach?
Yeah, so this was a big switch that we made when I came on board in January of 2016. Essentially, what we had done up until then is partner with external vendors for the 2-day events that we call them, in terms of leadership programs. And the thing about these events is that they are very meaningful when you're in them. And then they tend to be just this thing I did a few months ago or last year, and that learning doesn't really stick. And that's what I was finding out when I was doing my interviews across the business when I first came in and really just listening. The perception was, is we don't do training, and yet we were spending a good amount of money on training with many sessions a year. But the issue was, it wasn't sticking, right? We weren't seeing the impact and the results. And so we need to turn it on its head and really understand what's going to work in this environment with this population, given the speed, given how people learn and how that has evolved. When I think about millennial development, I think about instant, bite-sized, and continuous. And so how do we weave those three components into a program that's really going to work? And so we actually developed a program called Fast Start 90, which is a 90-day learning experience. And it's an opportunity for a combination of self-driven learning, where you take ownership to learn on your own, and we provide the guidance on what that looks like, as well as experiential social learning coming together at 3 different points in the 90-day experience to learn from each other, to practice the concepts and principles that we teach, and then to be able to not only practice, but to provide each other with accountability and have that accountability built in terms of the actual learning session. So that also builds a sense of camaraderie, which is one great strength of Groupon, is feeling like you have a really strong sense of camaraderie with each other. So the heart of the program is situational leadership. So we picked one framework that people can really align to and that works. And situational leadership has just been a very useful model here. So that's the crux of the program. And in terms of measuring results, we've sent over 500 leaders globally through FS90 now. And we were in a USA Today article for Groupon having top managers. We also won a Best in HR.com lead award in terms of best first-time manager program. So we've gotten the external recognition for our program as well, compared to other companies and benchmark. And the way that we've actually measured this program is not by participant surveys, which is usually what is asked, is what did you think of the program and will you apply it? And I think that's highly biased, and you're measuring reactions rather
It was
than
great. Sure, I will. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then we never know if you do or not.
Right.
So we actually ask the direct reports of the managers in the program. Are you seeing a difference in how your manager is coaching and working with you and using situational leadership? And we also ask the managers over time, over a 6-month period. Have you seen impact? Have you seen better quality management skills and leadership skills in this person? So we actually measure results versus self-assessment and reactions. And so when we measured those results, the improvement has been quite significant in terms of improvement, particularly around coaching quality, being a better coach. So that's it. That's our Fast Start. That's one example of our Fast Start 90 program that we've done.
Yeah. Oh, that is really cool. I love how you make it experiential, because I strongly believe people learn best through experiences, through discovery, and
Yep.
most of the programs I offer are experiential as well. But I also really like that you include, it sounds like there's an element of coaching and accountability to keep groups together, so they're networking, learning from each other, and hold each other accountable to actually go out and learn, and making it social, and that you're also getting the managers and direct reports involved, because not by asking them, I'm guessing that also makes them
Right.
a lot more aware that their teammates are going through this program, and helps them hold those people more accountable too.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly right.
Do
Yeah.
you, when you look at measuring results, do you try to compare that against any type of control group? Do you look at managers that haven't gone through the program to see if if there's a difference, or is it that you're trying to put everything through there? You're just looking at, okay, what are the actual results that came out of this?
Yeah, so we do a time one and time two with those managers. We don't. So let me answer the comparison question separately. One of the things that we do in measurement is not just after the program. Sometimes after the program, there's the recency effect, right? So you're seeing, how has my manager been with me lately? But we actually look at the time one data. So we send the first survey before the program even started,
Okay.
and then the first survey after that is when the program ends, and 3 months out. So we can actually see the progression in terms of comparing managers, individual managers' evolution. In terms of between manager comparison, one of the platforms that we just implemented is Glint. And that's a Pulse platform. There's quite a few of them out there, but we identified Glint to be our partner, our technology partner. And what this is a Pulse survey platform where every manager with at least 5 or more direct reports gets their own data. So they can compare themselves in terms of how is the engagement of their team either increasing or decreasing, but it offers us an opportunity to compare across managers, and compare managers based on different demographic features, based on different management levels, based on different departments, based on whether they attended a program or not. What are we seeing as some of the difference? So that's something that we actually just implemented in April. So it's quite early. It really needs to be embedded for about 12 months for us to really be able to measure effectively over time and see the difference. But that's going to be our avenue for being able to look at that.
Oh, that's great. And then are you able to take the results that you're getting from that? In other words, you're surveying managers and direct reports and seeing how their behaviors are changing. Are you
Mm-hmm.
able to take those and actually quantify those in any way, so you can show the company leadership that, hey, this is definitely having an impact and moving the needle?
Yeah, I think the best way to measure that is attrition and the cost of attrition. Right. So engagement, we have a question around intent to stay. And um, when your intent to stay scores are super low, you can predict that there's going to be some retention risk there. And you can look at, here's a percentage of attrition that you've had. What's the cost to hire? What's the loss of productivity? Some of it's intangible, but you can pull together that business case of, this is what it's costing you as you're losing people. Right? Or this is what it's costing you when you're making poor selection decisions, for example, like when you're really focused on getting the butts in the seats versus quality of hire. So what's that cost? So those are some things that we pulled together from a data perspective that are more high level, I would say, rather than specific, because even the high level is eye-opening to think about it in a different way in terms of the cost of a bad hire or the cost of attrition. But this is what's great about Mike, who's our CFO, who I'm presenting with on Monday, is that he totally gets it, and he totally gets that attrition has a real cost, that there's a real dollar tied to that, and so all of what we do by making sure the right people are in the door, that we make quality hires, not just focused on time to fill, but then also develop and engage them and give them tools to be successful and to
Hmm.
excel and to perform, so that ultimately lead to their retention. There's a real business and financial value to that.
Yeah, and you're overseeing talent acquisition now, so you
Yeah.
are intimately familiar with the pain and the financial costs that come with attrition and having to replace either bad hires or people that just don't work out or
Completely.
don't get the training they need. I mean, we don't have to go into like specific data, but like on average, what does a rehire or an attrition cost an organization like Groupon?
Yeah. So I think you attrition can cost millions,
Mm,
right? And you look at it by role. You look at director and above, 2 to 3 times the comp.
wow.
So you just calculate it, and this is not just unique to Groupon. It's every company that has, you look at per percentage of attrition based on your employee count, and you end up with the size with a almost $3 billion company. That's what you're looking at. You're looking at millions when you look at
Yeah.
the cost of potential attrition.
Right. So now you can come and say, hey, we're reducing attrition by X%. People are more engaged. This is saving
Yeah.
millions of dollars by not having to replace bad hires or people that don't.
Exactly. Or try to save people before they go out the door and having to replace them.
Yeah. And that's more at the frontline manager level. Are you doing anything at higher levels like director or executive
Mhm.
level programs?
Yeah. So, part of our work with what we're learning out of Glint is also what do different leadership levels need development on. And as you've seen, Groupon has gone through a lot of change over the last few years. And one area that we've identified as a great opportunity is around change management and developing really strong change management skills. And so that's something that we've really focused on this year is and sometimes you can control the change and sometimes you can't. And you continue to work towards making good, positive changes for the business. And as leaders, how do you help your team get on board with changes? And how do you get commitment versus compliance around the change? And so that's something important that we've been, we have a lot of subject matter experts here on the talent development team to help build and design programs that really work for our senior leaders.
I like that commitment versus compliance. I'm going to have to,
Yeah.
I wrote that down to remember that one because
Yeah.
that gets to the essence of when you're making changes and you're rolling out the education, you're educating people on it. Are they actually committed to doing it, or are they just going through the motions because they have to, or they feel like they
Yeah,
have to, right?
yeah. I mean, I think that's where accountability comes in, right? Does it matter? Does it matter if you're a great leader here or not?
Mm,
If it doesn't matter, if that's somehow not connected to your performance review or your compensation, then it's not going to matter.
yeah.
So how do you really create the hook where it's meaningful and it matters is very important.
You have a little bit of that psychology background, and you've got the acquisition and assessment stuff under you now. I'm wondering, have you done any work to define what great leadership looks like at Groupon so you can hire and develop towards that and find the right leaders to come in?
Yeah. Actually, we've done exactly that. So again, when I came in 2016, we had a competency model that you'd call an HR competency model that was more, I would say, targeted to the more generic around the individual contributor and what looks like success, what success looks like there. And that makes sense when you most of any company's volume and mass is individual contributor, but we really needed to get clarity on what does a great leader look like at Groupon. And so um, we started to listen and ask questions and listen and did a focus group and survey of 600 managers globally to really understand what are the strengths of our leaders today and what are the opportunities. And so from that, our 7 leadership habits were born. And we decided to call them habits because I'm not a fan of HR speak, and wanting to be more aligned with our mission, which is to become the daily habit. And so if that's our mission in terms of our customers and our consumers, what is our habit internally as leaders that we need to be living every day? And so we came up with 7, really simple Groupon-y habits that really resonate for our employees. And we didn't just create the habits and stick them on a shelf, but now they're embedded in our hiring and selection process, in our performance, our development, our succession, our promotion, our reward processes. So they're really embedded in all things talent, which I think is the real key. When we talk about accountability, it has to be weaved into all of those things. Otherwise, they're just going to be something that look good on a wall, but it's not something that's going to be meaningful for people.
Yeah, it has to be more than just sitting on the wall, right? It has to be
Right.
woven into the culture because, I mean, Enron had values on the wall, right? And it
Right.
doesn't mean they were actually living it, but you have to be really living this. So let's dive in a little bit deeper on that, because I am assuming that we have some listeners in talent development who are thinking, wow, that sounds really cool. I would love to do that. How do I do that? I know you said it starts with asking questions. So is it
Yeah.
interviewing different people in leadership to find out what they're doing? Tell me a little bit more about how you define those 7 leadership.
Yeah. So the process that we took is we first started with a random sample of managers and individual contributors in the company and sent them a survey. We actually use the CCL Leadership Gap Survey, which looks at, as a company, what are people saying that their managers are strongest at, and what are they saying is their biggest opportunities. So we did this survey and we got the data to identify those areas. And based on those areas and what we learned in the survey, we built a questionnaire for focus groups, for live focus groups, so we could really dig in to examples and understanding how the strengths and opportunities really play out in the gaps and how they play out. So we collected a ton of data, and this is probably the more straightforward, just a needs assessment that most talent development professionals, I imagine, are quite accustomed to, is just seeking to understand what's the problem, what's the pain, what do we need to solve, where are the barriers and the gaps. So we did that it took about 30 to 45 days to collect all of that data that my team led. And this was global, of course, as a global company. And so based on that, we had already had the idea of the habits. So we were going into our executive team with the idea of habits in mind. And so we created some of our initial habits based on what came up as really the key areas of behaviors that we need our leaders to model. And we took it to our executive team. And that's the time where it was the most, back and forth and sharing opinions and debating. Is this the right habit? Is this really when we think about Groupon and our strategy and our future, is this exactly right? So we had a lot of good debates with the executive team on what exactly the habits should be and look and sound like. So that took about 2 months to do. And then within, I think, 4 months, we really had these habits nailed down and socialized with the top leaders, that this is what they were going to be. It got the green light for that. And then that's when we started the work about embedding it into all of our talent processes. And so one of the first ways that the senior leaders got exposed, all of the senior leaders and actually all the senior managers and above, is that we customized a development 360 aligned with all the leader habits. And last year we sent over 400 senior managers and above through this 360. So people not only had to rate themselves against these leadership habits, but they had others rate them against these habits. So we started really inoculating people around what these habits are. Here's what we define as important. How do you compare? Where are you against them? And what do you need to do to develop against them?
Wow, you really are ingraining these habits into the culture, right into the 360,
Yeah.
and that you're putting 400 managers through, so they're really going to know them. Where did
Yeah.
the idea of the habits come from? You said you already knew you wanted to do habits. I'm curious.
Yeah. I mean, the 7 habits is the obvious one.
Mhm.
But you know what? I think I was talking, and this might have been my first week. I think I was talking to one of the engineers on the team about let's call them something different, and I was totally aligned with that. I had no interest in calling them behaviors or competencies or anything that was HRA.
Yeah.
And I think we were debating different things, and I think that habit came up, and it just clicked, right? Because that's our mission.
Yeah.
So it was just such an obvious connection to call it habits compared to anything else.
Yeah, I like that. And it's in line with when I work with clients to help them define what great leadership looks like. So one of the things we do that I love, we see it really is coming down to moments, right? What do great leaders do in those different moments? Because they're really a series of pivotal moments that happen throughout the day where they're interacting with their direct reports or other people, and they have an opportunity to make an impact. So it's not so much a competency or how they this way they act over time, but the habits and the moments and how they act in those moments can make such a huge difference.
That's exactly right.
What would you, we've talked a lot about some different things you've put in place, especially at Groupon. What would you say is your greatest accomplishment in your career or at Groupon up to this point? As a,
You know what? I would say that it's not even a program or a process. I would say that when I came in to Groupon, um, the team that I inherited had gone through a lot of struggles in terms of various leaders in a short amount of time and was not a global integrated team. They just weren't partnering in that collaborative, integrated way. And I think my greatest accomplishment still at Groupon is bringing that team together and really starting to move in a new direction with shared vision, shared goals, and collaboration, and building new values and norms for that team so that we could really unlock the power of all of them together, because individually they were all stars. And so really imagine, right? Imagine unlocking the group potential of that. And I think that's what we did. And that's why we were able to have so many great wins following that, because we really worked hard to bring it together in a really global way.
that's cool. What's one of the key things you did to really bring that team together?
um, I was real honest and upfront. I mean, part of I joined in January. I had my global leaders fly in February, and the whole theme of the session was hitting the reset button.
Hmm.
And it was about starting over and starting new, and like, let's deal with some of the things that are underlying. Let's make the implicit explicit and get real, and let's not leave this room until we do. So I think that one of the things that people will say about me is I'm unafraid. And so I will bring up the tough messages and challenge on what needs to happen and be really direct about it. Sometimes mostly that helps me. Sometimes it
Yeah,
hurts.
right. You
But
say
I
what needs to
think,
be said.
yeah, I mean, and I think that's just really important. And I think that people expect that in their leaders, and it's really important to expect that. And I think that I did that starting off the bat, and then I set clear expectations of what it means to be on this team and how I expect people will work with each other.
Yeah.
And so make those expectations really clear, and then hold people accountable to that. So you can't just make expectations clear, and then if people aren't living them, do nothing.
Right.
So I think that's probably a good summary of some of the
That's
actions.
big. Yeah. I mean, in my studies and going out, I mean, I think the best leaders are willing to be open, honest, and vulnerable, say what
Yes.
needs to be said, and share openly if they're struggling with things, but then also be tough and hold people accountable to the
Right.
things that they need to do.
Right.
So you're doing that. So that's a really great accomplishment. Of course,
Yeah.
now we have to switch gears and go to your biggest mistake or failure, which we already started talking about, which was, I think, taking too much of a consultative approach. I think you said
Yeah.
when you came in. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. My first presentation at BAE, it was actually a good 5 months into my tenure at BAE, and presenting to the HR leadership team there. The topic was assessments, and we're thinking about bringing assessments into the company. And I would say that, to keep it short, I really just came in with the super academic, super consultancy presentation versus a practical and more business focused presentation. And that was my miss, I think. And my boss and I talked through like what I could have done differently, what he could have done differently to help support me and get me ready for that. But I was too academic and I wasn't practical. And that was a big aha moment for me, because it made me realize, like, who did I think I was as a consultant trying to sell all these elegant solutions that were not practical, they were not pragmatic. And it's just so different to like know, like, here's all these elegant, beautiful, sometimes complex solutions. They may look good on paper. They may be like impressive in terms of what it, aspirationally it looks like, but then there's business, and then there's reality, and then there's the practical, what things can get done in what amount of time. And I think that my mistake was not really understanding that soon enough. I never forgot it after that. And so when I came to Groupon, that's, I like had 80 or 90 conversations with all levels of the business and really wanted to understand the problem we're trying to solve from a business standpoint. So I learned that lesson pretty quickly in my first internal move.
Well, and you learn to be more pragmatic and think about what's really realistic for the business. You still took some of the strengths that you get from being a consultant when you came into
Mm-hmm.
Groupon by asking a lot of questions,
Right,
interviewing people. Because I mean, for me, also having been a consultant for the last 8 years, I mean, that's what I do. If I come into any new
right,
organization, I just start asking a lot of questions because that's how you learn a lot of stuff. And some
right,
people don't have that experience and don't think about that. But
right,
that's, it's like I'm known among my friends of being really good at networking and meeting people. And I'm like, it's just because I just ask people questions when I meet them. And
right.
other people don't do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's the most important skill.
How do you, going back to the programs you put together, I want to make sure that we touch on this. How do you make sure that you're connecting things back to the overall company strategy?
Hmm. Yeah, well, the beauty is part of our company strategy is people. So
Mm,
I think that that's what's maybe unique about Groupon and particularly special is that um, we are people and building great teams, and our CEO in particular is a huge proponent of building great cultures and building great teams. So and there's a recognition that we can't get our whether it's convenience or supply or data or whatever those strategic levers are that we've talked about publicly, we can't get that done without a great team that's engaged. And so it's very much part of our strategy. It's not an extra. It's not a side thing or it's not a nice to have. There's a recognition that it's a must have. So I think that influencing your leadership team to make people a core part of the business strategy versus a side element is part of the challenge of the head of talent and the head of HR, and it's a very critical piece.
Man, I wish more companies operated that way with talent development as part and people as part of the strategy. I had a conversation with someone from a big
Right?
company yesterday who we talked about all these needs they had, and then he said, "Yeah, but the C-suite, the corporate leadership, they don't really believe in investing in talent development, so none of this stuff is really going
Ooh,
to be addressed." And I was like,
ouch.
man. All
Yeah,
right, well, moving on. Waste
yeah,
too much time here.
exactly.
How do you? It sounds like that was already kind of it was part of the company strategy, but how you mentioned influencing the corporate team or the leadership. How do you go about doing that? Is it a matter of building relationships and asking those questions? And how do you influence them to make sure talent development is a big part of the strategy?
Yeah, I think that in this case, we had leaders who, including our CEO and our CFO, and our chief counsel as well, who were just really bought in already. So that made it a lot easier. In my previous company, we did have a second, CEO who came in who wasn't quite bought in to the talent agenda and succession in particular. And the way that you influence leaders based on their hook, and his hook was data. And so succession was what we needed to really position and make sure that he was bought into. And so what we did in that situation is make succession super integrated in terms of data, right? We created these succession dashboards that gave you a readiness quotient based on a number of factors around succession. And we presented that to him, and we spoke his language around data. And so the influence is done by understanding what is the hook. If the hook isn't the direct goal that you have, then there might be another place where you can hook into and find the intersection. And that's how you find the intersection. But it all starts with like understanding what is that person, what is that leader really driven by, what's their hook, what's their motivation,
Yep.
how do they want to win, and then how do you align with how they want to win.
It's good. It's the core of how you influence people, right? You
Yeah,
understand what motivates them. And
that's
for
right.
some leaders, it's data, right? So you've got to
Right,
come prepared to share those results and that data. And for some, it's stories and
right.
you come with that instead. So that's
Exactly.
great. I think that's a great takeaway for people listening. Karishma, what trends are you seeing out there in the marketplace that are impacting how you do your work?
Yeah. So I think the biggest trend is AI. and automation. And one of the things that we're looking at from a recruiting standpoint is how do we automate from a candidate discovery and a candidate ranking standpoint, especially when we think about wanting through our ATS and getting the best candidates and figuring out who those are so we can be most efficient for our recruiting team is something that we're definitely looking at and figuring out. Glint is an AI tool. So Glint, when you have the data in front of you, you also get an action plan based on what your data tells you. And it tells you, here's the things you can do based on what your data suggests. So the trend is AI and the trend is automation. And I think if you're not thinking about how automation can help you on your talent development and recruiting journey by now, you're going to be way behind soon enough.
It's funny, before we started recording, you told me that you didn't have a tool to recommend, but you've mentioned this Glint twice.
Sure.
So I think it's
Glint is a great tool. Yeah, I guess I was thinking of something maybe that we had homegrown, but
right.
the resource or the tool, Glint, absolutely. And we're looking at different recruiting softwares that will have a similar impact as Glint, but just for our recruiting team.
Cool. Yeah, that can make a big difference, especially if you're hiring a lot of people.
Exactly.
Karishma, what's a book that you often recommend that's had an impact on you and your career?
Yeah, so I'm going to actually speak to a book that's actually more fresh in my mind, which is Ray Dalio's Principles, because I finished it not too long ago.
Nice.
And the concept that really resonated for me in his book was around radical open-mindedness and radical transparency. And this is built a little bit off of Kim Scott's Radical Candor, but this concept of let's just tell the real deal, right? Let's just tell it like it is. Because in business, maybe at home, you got to think about how you position it just right. And I'm not saying that you don't do that in at work, that you don't care about other people's feelings and that you're not respectful. Of course you are all that. But I think that the risk is that there are too many people, I think, that don't necessarily have that courageous conversation and have that transparency, and it slows you down. And I think it's just really important to have radical transparency, radical candor, to get to the right effective end and goal, but to do it in the most efficient way. And then this idea of open-mindedness. I mean, my role has expanded every year for the last 10 years. Because I've been open-minded about doing new things and being challenged. And it hasn't always come with a promotion. That's okay, because actually the promotions always come later because you're willing to say yes first and do more. And I think that's also my advice, for people who I've mentored and people who are coming up in this field and within HR and talent development. So it's this idea of just openness, transparency. Have the difficult conversations, be courageous, do something every day that scares you, Eleanor Roosevelt.
Nice.
So that's how I would think about that. And that book really opened my eyes to that.
Yeah, that radical transparency. I mean, it takes me back to what you said you did, your greatest accomplishment of bringing the team together when you came into Groupon. And I asked, how did you do that? What's one of the big keys? And you said it was being authentic, honest, transparent about what we're doing, and then holding people accountable to that. And here you are talking about that being one of the core leadership principles that you got from Ray Dalio in his book, which is a really famous book right now, well known, right?
That's right.
And how that's helped you. And you're right, to very much extent, it's useful at home too. You got to be a little bit careful with how you use it with your spouse and your kids, but really, I mean, I'll be like a little bit vulnerable here and just say, like, for my wife and I at home, like, I think that when we made the decision to start being more transparent and say things that are on our mind and share things we're thinking about, our marriage has gotten better. And I think that's true for almost any relationship, whether it's personal or business. You're not holding anything back, and you're actually communicating effectively instead of just wondering what other people are thinking.
Right. Absolutely. I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, so that's great. And I love the idea of being, you said open-minded. I think of growth-minded, where you're always looking for new challenges, new things that you can learn, new things you can do, saying yes to things, even if it doesn't come with a promotion right away, but being willing to jump on it and take a chance and be willing to fail and learn. And seems like that's worked out well for you over the last 10 years or so as you continue to grow and get new responsibilities and move up in your career.
Yeah, it totally has.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Well, Karishma,
Yeah.
this has been great. For anybody listening
Awesome.
who wants to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Link me in.
Link me in. All right. So
And
LinkedIn.
if you don't have a LinkedIn profile, you're behind. So make it happen.
If you, that is true. If you don't have a LinkedIn profile, you are definitely behind. I think everybody's on there.
Yeah.
So make sure that you connect with Karishma, connect with me. I'm posting on
Yeah.
LinkedIn every day, and I think it's a great place to keep in touch with people in the professional world. So, Karishma,
Awesome.
thank you again for coming on the
Thank you,
podcast and
Andy.
sharing your experience, your wisdom, your advice. I really appreciate it, and I know our listeners as well. So, thank you again for coming on the Talent Development Hot Seat.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Andy.
You're welcome. Take care.